Good morning, grade 11s. Welcome to today's lesson. I hope you are well rested and you're looking forward to today's session. My name is Ms. Gasa and I'm excited to have you in my class. If you look at the screen, my email address is there. Please make use of it. You can ask me any questions related to today's lesson, or if you need help with anything that's English related, I am here to help you. Today we are talking about something very interesting. We are looking at poetry. We are going to analyze poetry. We're going to unpack poetry questions and discuss how to answer them. Okay. At the end of this lesson, you will know how to analyze a poem. You'll understand how to unpack poetry questions and also identify and explain the poetic devices used in the poem. You'll also know how to recognize the poetic devices that enhance the meaning and reading of the poem. And lastly, you will know how to demonstrate understanding of the poem through completing the activity. Okay, and I just want you for a moment to think about this question. I want to find out from you, how do you go about analyzing a poem? So let's say you get a poem from your teacher, they're just handing out the poem, and they just say, it's up to you to look at the poem and to answer the questions. What do you do? What is the first thing that you do? What advice would you give to someone who says, I have a poem and I don't know what to do with it. I'm not so good at poetry. You are in grade 11. You are more experienced with poetry and literature. What should I do? What would you do? Do you read the question? Do you actively read the poem? Do you look for certain things in the poem? What do you do? And that method that you have, is it working? Is it getting you the maximum marks? Or do you think you need to change it a bit so that you can get the marks that you desire when it comes to poetry? So I just want you to think of those things for a moment. All right, today we're going to look at a poem by Christina Rossetti. And the poem is called Remember. So I'm going to read the poem once, and then we're going to look at ways that we can analyze poetry, just some tips. Remember, as I said in the previous slide, there are various ways. So you can add to what we're going to discuss in today's lesson, or you can subtract, as long as it works for you, as long as it's effective and you do very well when it comes to poetry. Remember me when I'm gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you can no more hold me by the hand. No, I have turned to go, yet turning stay. Remember me when no more day by day, you tell me of our future that you'd planned. Only remember me, you understand, it'll be late to cancel then or pray. Yet if you should forget me for a while, and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that once I had, better by far should forget and smile than that you should remember and be sad. All right, so that is our poem by Christina Rossetti. So let's have a look at a couple of ways that you can analyze this poem by Christina. So the first tip is you should read the poem out loud a couple of times. When you read the poem out loud, it helps you to get the feel of the poem. So you'll know when you should pause, you know when you should go slower. You'll understand and recognize when the tone or the mood of the poem is changing. So reading out loud really, really helps. And you're also practicing your reading when you're doing that. Next, you should ask yourself what the poet is saying to the reader. So this is when you identify the subject and the theme. So if you had to sum up in one word what Christina is talking about in the poem, Remember, what would you say? What is the subject? Is it life? Is it death? Is it being remembered? How do you feel after reading the poem? Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling happy? So those are the things that you need to think about. You also need to think about the intentions of the poem. Why were they writing this particular poem? And with this one, what comes in very handy is knowing more about the poets. So finding out the background information will help you understand the intention and will also place in context what is happening around that time when the poets wrote their work. What you should also have a look at or consider is the diction. So ask yourself what type of language and style has been used. Is it formal? Is it informal? Is it language that we use in every day? Or does it belong to a certain time period that you might not be familiar with? Is the slang, the use of punctuation, are the words that are misspelled or are the words that are omitted? So you need to think about those things. And you need to ask yourself, what impact does the diction have on the poet's work? Another thing you need to do is look up words that you're not sure about. So when you're reading the poem out loud, you're also taking note of other things as well. So you're not just passively reading, you're actively reading the poem because you're going to read it out loud a couple of times. That's what the first step said. So when you do that, you're taking note of words that you're not sure about. So when you're doing this in class or you're doing it at home, you can use your dictionary. You can go online or the physical dictionary, and you can look up words that you're not sure about. Unfortunately, in exam setting, you do not have that luxury. So what can you do? You need to have a strategy of dealing with words that you're unfamiliar with. So what you can do is you can look at the word, you can look at the sentence and see by looking at the rest of the sentence if you can get the gist of what the poet is saying with this word. Okay. I also want you to think about what else you can do when you come across words you're not sure about in a poem. Just think about that for a moment. What tips, what suggestions, what do you do when you come across a word you're not sure about in an exam setting? And how do you overcome that challenge? Right, the next thing you can do is establish what feelings the poet evokes in the reader and assess the mood of the poem. So this is when the reading out loud comes in handy. Then you can think, how does the poet want me to feel after reading this? That's the question you need to ask yourself. And you also need to look at the form of the poem as part of the poet's method of getting his message or her message across. So when you speak about form, we're speaking about the type of poem. Is it a ballad? Is it a ballad, or is it a sonnet? Is it a lyric? Is it a free verse poem? You need to think of those things and what impact it has. Okay. And this is very important because when it comes to poetry and all things literature, you will be asked questions that have to do with figures of speech. So what you can do when you're reading the poem is just take notes of the figures of speech and underline them and try to write notes on the side that what is, if it's a simile, when it comes to questions about figures of speech, they're worth 3 marks. So you need to ask yourself 3 things, and you need to ask yourself, what is the figure of speech? What is being compared? And explain it. Okay. Also, you need to understand what influence these individual poetic devices have on the actual poem. Okay. All right, another thing you need to look at is the actual structure of the poem. Is there anything different? Is the poem written in one line, or is it, what does it look like? What does the poem look like? Right, the last thing you need to ask yourself is, does the poet succeed in what they're trying to do? Do they evoke those emotions from you? Can you relate to what they're trying to say? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? Those are the things you need to bear in mind. Let's have a look at the background of the poet. So Christina was born in London, and she wrote many different types of poets, and she also wrote books. She wrote children's books, and what she focused on is her writing focused on her spiritual existence, her observations of nature, and just her own life experiences. She was actually quite famous in her time. She was regarded as one of the most well-known female poets at the time, and her works appeared in The Goblet Market and Other Poems in 1862, and this was only when she was 31. But she also received critique and praise for her work. If you think about it, that during those times, and being female and what it meant at the time, being a writer, being famous, so those are some of the challenges that she had to deal with. And this particular poem was written when she was 19 years old, and this was when she was very young. Obviously, she's 19, she's a teenager still. And just before then, her family had faced a difficult time, and her father became ill, and they were facing financial difficulties. And she was also diagnosed with bronchitis just before she wrote the poem, a couple of years before she wrote the poem. In 1843, she faced health issues, and unfortunately she died of Graves' disease in 1872. Okay. So think about those things. Think about the poem. It speaks about, what's the subject or theme of the poem? I don't want to say right now because it's one of the questions that will come up later. And think about what she went through in her life. The financial difficulty, her father being sick, she herself being sick and being diagnosed with tuberculosis. And so just the idea of life ending as you read about her background. Okay, so she has more information about her. If you look at the bottom of the screen, that's Miss Rossetti. Okay, with the bob and with long hair there. She died at the age of 29. So she died 10 years after she'd written the poem, Remember. All right, so let's have a look at a couple of questions about the poem. What is the poem about? It is about her wanting to be remembered when she passes on. Okay. The next one is about theme. So before we look at the question about theme, I want us to have a clear idea of what a theme is. Theme refers to the subject, okay, or the central idea of the poem. It is also equated with the meaning or sense of piece of writing. Okay. So let's go back to the question. What is the theme on which the poem, Remember, is based? Or what is the subject? Or what is the central idea? Or what is the underlying thought of the poem? Okay, the theme is death. She speaks about death and celebrating life and wanting to be remembered. Right, questions around figures of speech. What are figures of speech? They refer to expressions used in a figurative manner. So we're not talking about the literal meaning. Okay. It is very important to understand how figures of speech work. When it comes to literature, they will always follow you wherever you go. So make sure you are clear on all kinds of figures of speech. So the question here says, discuss the figures of speech used in the poem. So you remember what I said when you're reading out loud. Pick up the poetic devices, underline them, identify them, so that you can be able to discuss them. Okay. So let's have a look at a couple of figures of speech. Just a bit of revision on figures of speech associated with ideas. We have the hyperbole, and hyperbole, just think exaggeration. Okay, so think of a couple of examples of hyperbole. It'll take me 1,000,000 years to finish doing my homework. That's not very true. Might take you a long time, but not 1,000,000 years. Okay, so it's something that has been blown out of proportion. When we speak about euphemisms, we're speaking about a nice way of saying something, you know, and it's less offensive or less harsh. A popular example is he passed away instead of saying he died, right? Or he is dead. Comparisons. When you talk about comparisons, it's those three things: personification, simile, and metaphor. You must be very familiar with these ones, so I'm not going to go into great detail with them. Right, then we look at figures of speech with differences. We have the oxymoron. Oxymorons are two words that are opposites that would not usually go together. So an example is beautiful disaster or a beautiful cold day. So those things do not go along, because you cannot have something that's beautiful and something that's a disaster. Okay, so these are words. A paradox is the same thing, opposites, but this one comes with phrases. It's a statement or a phrase, okay, that is contradictory. A pun has a double meaning of a word or phrase and is for just suggestive and humorous purposes. When it comes to pun, it's also a play on words. So you can think of words that sound similar. What do we call those? Homo what? Yes. Homonyms and homophones. You can play around with that and create puns. Okay, sound devices. Just like with comparisons, I believe you are more familiar with sound devices, your alliterations, assonance, and onomatopoeia. Okay. If you're not sure about any of the figures of speech, please email me and let me know what you need help with, and we can take it from there. Okay. All right, let's go back to the questions. Is Christina a deeply religious person? And how does the poem Remember show this? Let's go back to the poem. So here's our poem, okay? Have a look at let's say the first 4 lines. Okay, that should give you an idea. Silent land. Remember me when I'm gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you can no more hold me by the hand. Okay, silent land. afterlife. Okay. And what else can tell us if she's a deeply religious person from the poem? Any other part in the poem? I want you to think about that. Let's go back to our questions. What is the tone of the first 8 lines? Okay. What is the tone of the first 8 lines? So when we speak about tone, it's very important to familiarize yourself with adjectives that are to describe tone. You can divide them into the positive adjectives for tone and the negative adjectives for tone, and familiarize yourself with them. It makes it very interesting because sometimes you can be asked the question and not have the right word in mind at that particular moment. But when you have a list that you've made, you can think of it in that exam setting and say, instead of saying the tone is good or the tone is not very nice, you can use better adjectives to describe the tone. But when we're asking tone, what we basically want is we want to find out the poet's attitude towards his subject, okay, and towards the reader. What is the attitude of the poem, of the poet, towards what they're talking about? So what is Christina's attitude towards death? What does she make of death? What does she make of her life? Okay. Remember, tone is something that can change in the poet. But this question, they're asking you in the first 8 lines, which suggests that in the last 6 lines, it might change. Remember, this is a Petrarchan sonnet, so it is divided into 8 and 6 lines. So that is the form of the poem, remember. Next questions. Refer to line 1 and 2, gone away, gone far away. How do these words set the initial mood of the poem? So when you talk about mood, we want to know about the feel of the poem, the atmosphere it creates, okay? And we also want to hear from you about the poet's attitude towards the subject, okay? So when you think mode, think the feel, the atmosphere it creates. So gone away, gone far away. It almost seems like they're making death not such a bad thing. Like, yeah, I'm gone and I'm gone far away to a better place, to a silent land, as she mentions. Okay. So how do these words set the initial mood? The same thing with mood and tone. So mood, think of those words again, those list of words that I said you should make for tone. Do that as well. The mood is warm, the mood is lovely, because you can not just have those words in exam setting, but once you have your list, you can go over it and keep that in mind when you answer these questions. Okay. Explain what the use of the phrase "the silent land" conveys about the speaker's state of mind. So with this question, think about silent land. What is the silent land? It's where people go after they die. And she's not specific about where it is. But based on this, silent land, which means you are no longer, you could think of a peaceful place, because what's connotated with that word silent, you know. Refer to line 4. No, I have turned to go, you're turning stay. Discuss the significance of this description in the context of the poem. Okay, so I want you to think about this question, note it down, and you can send me your responses along with the rest of the questions that we asked that we did not discuss. Remember, the purpose of today's lesson was to unpack poetry questions and how to answer them. Okay. And the answer is the speaker of this poem is self-centered. The next question is, the speaker of this poem is self-centered. Do you agree with this statement? Justify your response by referring to imagery and diction. We speak about imagery. Imagery is the use of word pictures or images that usually appeal to our senses, but they may also appeal to the heart or to the mind. When we speak about diction, this refers to the language, okay? Remember that words do not always have a fixed meaning, but remember they have literal and figurative meaning. So that's the vocabulary, the choice of words creates this, okay? So when we speak about imagery, what picture comes into mind? So let's go back to the question. Justify your response by referring to the imagery and diction. The imagery she uses in the poem. Okay, let's go back to the poem. So think about the images that the imagery she uses, the images, the pictures that form in your head. Okay. And the question about, is she a deeply religious person? If you look at, let's see, line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Line 8. It speaks about praying and counseling. Okay, so that could also be your answer. You could discuss that line when answering the question about, is she a deeply religious person? Okay. If you have any questions, please note them down, and you are welcome to email me, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. All right, that is it. I want to know from you, what do you like or dislike about the poem? And what would you like to be remembered for when you die? What legacy do you want to live? So think about when people, maybe at your memorial service or at your funeral, what people would say about you. What would people say about you? What would people celebrate about you? I know it's not always nice to think about death, and we always think it's something that's not not something that's going to happen to other people or far away from us. So, but these are things we need to think about. All right, well done, grade 11s. That is it. Thank you for joining today's lesson, and I will see you tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day. And remember my email address. If you have any questions, anything you're not sure about, please contact me. See you tomorrow, or hear from you tomorrow, grade 11s. Bye.